Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're looking at something a little bit different. We are tackling Chapter 3 of Underground to Canada.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, have you read this one?
I have. Yeah. It's a powerful chapter.
It really is. And, it's one that I think a lot of students struggle with,
Right.
um, both in terms of, like, the homework questions that often come up,
Yeah.
but also just, like, wrapping their heads around
Oh, for sure.
what Smucker is doing in this chapter.
Absolutely.
There's so much going on.
There is.
So we're going to break it all down.
Okay.
We're picking up with Julie Amley. She is an enslaved girl, and she's being taken further south,
Right.
away from everything she knows.
That seems familiar. Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're going to unpack this chapter together so you can not only, like, ace those homework questions,
Right.
but, like, really understand those characters, the themes, the symbolism.
Yeah, Smucker doesn't pull any punches. She really uses every tool in her writer's toolbox to make you feel what Julie's going through.
Yeah.
And right from the start, you get this sense of dread and despair that just permeates the setting. I mean, the scorching sun, the dust, the chains. It's like she wants you to feel the weight of this journey alongside Julie.
It's heavy.
It is.
And then there's that comparison she makes between the chains and funeral bells.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, it's like chills.
Right. Such a powerful image.
Yeah. Why do you think she did that?
Well, I think it speaks volumes about Julie's emotional state. She's not just physically being taken away from home.
Right.
She's grieving a loss of innocence, a loss of safety, of everything familiar. It's like she's being carried towards her own metaphorical funeral.
Whoa, that's a really interesting take on that.
Yeah.
It definitely adds another layer to that opening scene.
Yeah.
And speaking of adding layers, let's talk about the driver for a sec.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so he is casually wiping his sweat, drinking water, and these kids are just like baking in the sun.
Yeah. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah, why include that detail?
I think that detail is so crucial because it's not just about physical discomfort.
Right.
It's about dehumanization. The driver sees these children as property, not people.
Okay.
Their needs are irrelevant to him.
And that's a point that comes up in one of the study guide questions, right?
Yeah.
It asks for specific details that show the driver's awareness of the heat and how it contrasts with his treatment of the children.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how Smucker uses small details to reveal big ideas. By contrasting the driver's comfort with the children's suffering, she's really forcing you to confront the cruelty inherent in the system of slavery.
So then we have Jewel Kamini, right?
Yeah.
And it would be so easy for her to just shut down completely,
Oh, absolutely.
given everything that's going on.
Right.
But we see her trying to comfort the younger children,
Yeah.
even though she's terrified herself. What do you make of that?
It's a testament to her resilience and her capacity for empathy. Even in the midst of her own fear and uncertainty, she finds the strength to care for others.
Yeah.
It's almost like she's starting to understand that their only hope lies in looking out for each other.
That's a really good point, and it's something that the essay questions really want us to dig into, right?
Yeah.
One of them asks about the power of human connection in this chapter.
Yeah, you see those connections forming in subtle ways throughout the chapter. Julie Laley caring for the children, the bond between the enslaved men.
Oh, right.
Even Mr. Fox and James, reaching out to offer water.
Yeah.
It's like these small acts of kindness are tiny sparks of resistance against this overwhelming system of oppression.
Okay, so speaking of Mr. Fox and James,
Yeah.
their arrival, it's like such a pivotal moment.
Oh, it changes everything.
It does. It's like this sudden burst of light in all this darkness.
Such a stark contrast,
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have the slave traders, the driver, the overseer figures of cruelty and dominance.
Right.
And then you have Mr. Fox and James, who are described as being so gentle and compassionate. It's like Smucker is visually representing this clash between hope and oppression.
And that's something that the study guide asks us to look at, too.
Right.
To compare and contrast those two sets of characters.
Right.
And think about how their beliefs about slavery are reflected in their words and their actions.
Absolutely. Which is a really important exercise. It's not enough to just say, these guys are bad, those guys are good.
Right.
You have to dig deeper and understand the motivations, the justifications, the mindsets that fuel this whole conflict over slavery.
It's all about understanding the nuances, right?
Absolutely. And that's where those close reading skills come into play. You know, you have to pay attention to the language, the imagery, the symbolism that Smucker uses to convey these really complex ideas.
So back to Mr. Fox and James for a second. One thing that really struck me was how James, immediately goes to offer water to the children.
Yeah.
Even before, speaking to Lester.
Right.
Why do you think he does that?
It's a spontaneous act of empathy.
Okay.
You know, he sees their suffering and he responds to that human need without hesitation. It speaks volumes about his character and his understanding of what these children are going through.
And it's interesting because the study guide also asks about the symbolism of water in this chapter.
Oh, yeah.
We see the children's desperate thirst,
Right.
that terrifying waterfall,
Right.
and then this act of kindness from James.
Like water is representing so many different things at once.
Yeah, so many different things.
The essay questions also want you to analyze that water symbolism. And it's not enough to just identify the different ways that water is used. You have to think about how it contributes to the overall meaning of the chapter.
So it's about understanding how that one element can represent both suffering and hope, and how that duality reflects those larger themes of the story.
Yeah, and it's also about noticing those small details that Smucker uses to reinforce the symbolism.
Like what?
Remember how James uses a gourd to give the children water?
Oh, yeah.
It's just a simple object,
Right.
but it feels significant somehow.
It does, yeah.
Well, the glossary in the study guide defines gourd as a vessel often associated with rural life and resourcefulness.
Okay.
So it's a subtle detail, but it highlights that contrast between the generosity of Mr. Fox and James and the cruelty of the slave traders.
Okay.
They're using the resources that they have to offer comfort and care,
Right.
while the slave traders are focused on profit and control.
That's such a good point. It's amazing how much meaning Smucker packs into even the smallest details.
It's true, and it's what makes this chapter so rich and rewarding to analyze.
Yeah.
There's always something more to uncover, another layer of meaning to explore.
I completely agree. So we left off with that image of James offering the water to the children from his gourd.
Right.
And, we were talking about the symbolism of water. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Lester.
Okay.
Now, remember, he's described as a mulatto.
Right.
And the glossary in the study guide actually helps us understand, that term in its historical context.
It's important to acknowledge that that term is no longer considered appropriate.
Right.
But it is significant in understanding Lester's character.
Yeah.
And his place in this story.
And I think it highlights how, his mixed heritage might have shaped his experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And outlook.
Yeah.
And we see that reflected in his demeanor, right?
Yeah.
He's the only one who meets the gaze of the slave traders with anger.
That defiance is crucial.
Yeah.
It suggests a different level of awareness,
Uh-huh.
a refusal to be completely subjugated. And one of the essay questions actually asks about what his character reveals about the possibilities for Black people. Okay.
In a society dominated by slavery.
That's such a good question.
Yeah, it's like Smucker is showing us that even within this brutal system,
Right.
there's room for individual resistance. Lester might be in chains,
Right.
but his spirit isn't broken.
It ties into that larger theme of hope
Exactly.
that runs through the entire chapter.
Yes. Even in the darkest moments,
Right.
there are these glimmers of defiance,
Yeah.
these acts of courage and compassion that suggest the possibility of change.
Okay, so let's shift gears again.
Okay.
And talk about the fat man's reaction to Mr. Fox and James. I mean, he completely freaks out. He calls them Quaker abolitionists
Right.
and free nigger boy with such venom.
Yeah.
It's like those words themselves are weapons.
That's a fantastic observation.
But why that reaction?
Well, the study guide actually asks us why those terms are so threatening to him.
Yeah.
And it's a really important question to consider. I think it's because those words represent everything that he is afraid of.
Yeah.
The idea of abolition,
Right.
of enslaved people gaining their freedom. It completely undermines his authority and the entire system that benefits him.
Precisely. It challenges his deeply held beliefs about the natural order of things.
Right.
About his own superiority. And that fear is what drives his anger and his hatred.
And that's another theme that the study guide asks us to explore, right?
Oh, yeah.
The role of fear in this chapter.
Fear is everywhere in this chapter.
Yeah.
It's not just Jew Melly and the children who are afraid.
Right.
The slave traders are operating from a place of fear as well.
Oh, what kind of fear?
It's a fear of losing control.
Okay.
Of having their world turned upside down.
Mm.
And it's a fear that ultimately leads to more cruelty and oppression.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's like fear is this vicious cycle
Right.
that keeps the system of slavery in place.
And I think that brings us to another question from the study guide.
It asks about the significance of Julie being drawn to those words, Quaker abolitionist and free nigger boy. What do you think that signifies?
I think it speaks to Julie's growing awareness
Okay.
of the forces that are at play in the world around her. She's starting to understand that there are people who are fighting against slavery.
Yeah.
People who believe in freedom and equality.
Right.
And those words, those ideas, they're planting a seed of hope in her mind.
It's like she's getting this glimpse of a different reality, a different future that's possible.
Exactly. And it's a future that she'll ultimately fight for.
Right.
Remember, this is just the beginning of her journey.
Okay, now I want to talk about the setting for a minute.
Okay.
The study guide asks us to consider how the landscape of the South contributes to that atmosphere of oppression.
Yeah, it's not just a backdrop.
Right.
The scorching sun, the dusty roads, the vast fields of cotton and tobacco, they all contribute to this feeling of being trapped.
Of being suffocated by the system of slavery.
Yeah, like the land itself is mirroring that oppressive reality that Julesy and the other children are experiencing.
And yet within that landscape, there are also hints of hope.
Oh, like what?
Well, remember the waterfall? While it's initially terrifying to Julie, it also represents the power of nature.
Okay.
A force that can't be entirely controlled by man.
Oh, that's a good point. And then there's like the mention of Canada.
Yes.
This distant land that represents the possibility of freedom.
It's like Smucker is planting these little seeds of hope within the landscape itself, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the possibility of change exists.
I love that. It's like she's saying that freedom is out there somewhere on the horizon.
Yeah.
Just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. And that's the journey that Julie is about to embark on.
Right.
A journey filled with danger and uncertainty, but also with hope and the possibility of liberation.
Before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to circle back to that symbol of water.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about like the different ways it's used in the chapter. But I'm curious, do you see any other layers of meaning there?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what literary analysis is all about.
What do you mean?
There's always more to uncover, more to think about.
So what are you thinking?
Well, we've talked about the thirst representing suffering.
Right.
And the act of giving water representing hope. But what about the waterfall? Could it also represent something else?
I don't know. What do you have in mind?
Well, perhaps the waterfall could also symbolize the potential for change.
Okay.
It's this powerful force that can be both destructive and transformative,
Yeah.
just like the system of slavery can be destructive.
Right.
But the fight for abolition can be transformative.
Wow. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, it's like the waterfall is this symbol of both the danger and the possibility that lie ahead for Julie C.
And that duality is at the heart of this entire chapter.
Exactly. It's a chapter that's filled with despair and oppression, but also with these glimmers of hope and resistance.
And it's that tension that keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Oh, for sure.
Wondering what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and it's what makes this chapter such a rich and rewarding one to study.
All right, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of the deep dive.
We have.
Are you ready to move on to the final section?
Absolutely. Let's dive into those essay questions and see what other insights we can uncover.
Okay, so let's tackle these essay questions head on.
All right, let's do it.
The first one asks us to really dig into the symbolism of water in chapter 3.
Okay.
We've touched on this throughout the deep dive, but now it's time to synthesize all of our thoughts.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about water as a symbol is how versatile it is. It can represent life-giving sustenance, as we see with James offering water to the children. Yeah. But it can also embody fear and the unknown, like Julie's terror of the waterfall.
And don't forget the children's desperate thirst.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a pretty powerful representation of the cruelty of slavery.
Right, denying them even the most basic human need.
Yeah, so when you're writing your essay, think about how Smucker uses that water imagery to create those contrasting emotions, the agony of deprivation and the relief of compassion.
All right, next essay question.
Okay, hit me.
This one wants us to compare and contrast the slave traders with the Quaker abolitionists, focusing on their beliefs about slavery and how those beliefs manifest in their actions.
So this is where you can, like, really showcase those close reading skills, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Look at the language Smucker uses to describe each group.
Yeah.
Notice the stark contrast in their demeanor, their clothing, even the way they speak. For example, the driver is described as rough and callous, while Mr. Fox is depicted as gentle and kind.
Yeah, it's like their physical appearance reflects their inner beliefs.
Yeah, and don't forget about, like, the power dynamics at play.
Oh, that's huge.
The slave traders wield their whips and their words to assert dominance.
Right.
While Mr. Fox approaches Lester with a genuine question. Why are you in chains? It's a subtle but crucial difference.
It's like he sees Lester's humanity.
Yeah.
Something the slave traders completely disregard.
Exactly. So when you're writing this essay,
Okay.
think about how Smucker uses these contrasting characters to expose the moral bankruptcy of slavery.
Right.
And to highlight the courage of those who fight against it.
Okay, so moving on to James.
Yeah.
The free black boy.
The essay question asks what his character reveals about the possibilities for black people in a society dominated by slavery.
That's a great question.
This is where we see the power of hope and representation.
Okay.
James is living proof that freedom is possible.
That black people can exist outside the confines of slavery.
His presence, like, challenges the very foundation of the slave system.
It does. It's like Smucker is saying, look, here's a black man who is free, who is working alongside a white abolitionist. This is what's possible.
And it's important to remember the historical context here.
Oh, absolutely.
This chapter is set in a time when slavery was deeply entrenched in American society.
Right.
The fact that James exists, that he's free and actively working to help others, is a powerful statement.
It's a reminder that even within oppressive systems, there are individuals and communities working towards justice and equality.
And that's a message that resonates even today.
Absolutely.
That's like a call to action.
Yeah.
A reminder that we all have a role to play in fighting against oppression and creating a more just world.
Okay, next up, an essay question about the role of fear in Chapter 3.
Fear, okay. We talked about how fear motivates both the enslaved people and the slave traders.
Yeah.
But how do we translate that into, like, a compelling essay?
Start by looking at specific examples of how fear manifests in the chapter.
Okay.
We see Julie fear of the unknown, the children's fear of the slave traders, and the fat man's fear of abolition.
Oh, and don't forget the driver.
Oh, yeah, he's a good point.
He seems afraid to show even the slightest bit of compassion for fear of what the overseer might do.
Exactly. So you can explore how fear is used as a tool of control, how it perpetuates that cycle of oppression, but also consider how fear can be a catalyst for change.
Like how Julie's fear of being taken further south might ultimately fuel her determination to escape.
Exactly. It's about understanding the complexity of fear.
Yeah.
And its role in both upholding and dismantling systems of power.
Okay, last essay question.
Hit me.
The significance of the setting in Chapter 3.
All right.
We've talked about how the landscape contributes to that atmosphere of oppression.
Yeah.
But what else can we say about it?
Think about the setting as more than just a backdrop.
Yeah.
It's a character in itself, shaping the events of the story and influencing the emotions of the characters.
Right, like how the vastness of the fields emphasizes that feeling of isolation.
Yeah.
And how the scorching sun reflects the cruelty of the system.
Exactly. But remember, even within that oppressive landscape, there are hints of hope.
Like the waterfall representing the potential for change and the distant promise of Canada symbolizing freedom?
Precisely. So when you're writing your essay, think about how Smucker uses the setting to create a sense of both despair and hope, reflecting the complex reality of Julie's journey.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
I hope so. This chapter is packed with so many layers of meaning, and I encourage you to really dive deep and explore those complexities. Pay attention to the symbolism, the language, the character development, all those elements that make this story so powerful and enduring.
And most importantly, remember that Julie Kinsley's story is just one small part of a much larger narrative, the history of slavery and the ongoing fight for freedom and equality.
Yes.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep using your voice to challenge injustice wherever you see it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, happy reading.